I saw this a couple days ago. Matt definitely called it out as a topic that we need to talk about on this week's podcast. But uh, Giorgia Meloni's party pushing to declare Italy's gold property of the people. Right. So that's December 1st. I saw this headline and I thought to myself, is Italy's gold not the property of its people? And I had a lot of questions on why is it such a big deal? Why is it making headlines? And what is actually going on under the surface here? So I started to dig into it a bit. But Matt, I'm gonna just throw it to you. Explain to me why is it such a big deal that Giorgia Meloni's party is saying it's now the property of the people? Why is that not already the case? I guess is my first
Yeah,
question. And then secondarily, the second headline, why is the ECB so seemingly upset that they're trying to make this push?
yeah. Um, so I'll once again make another comparison. When George Maloney says the gold is the property of the people, right? I'm not 100% certain that it follows the same kind of framework that we're used to in the US for most of our audience. Who owns the gold, right? The gold in Fort Knox and West Point, and to a very small degree in a vault in Colorado, owned by the US Treasury, like that is the property of the people. By definition, like, yeah, it is the US Treasury's gold. It's in US Treasury vaults. It's not in a bank vault, right? The way the US gold situation kind of resolves itself. I'll do a compare and contrast here because it highlights the differences um, and the added level of uncertainty facing Europe and its credit money, banking situation, sovereign issues, all of the above. In the U.S., most of us are familiar with Executive Order 6102. Basically, what that amounts to is the United States public sector, the U.S. Treasury, bailed out the banking system after, there was just mass defaults, insolvency, et cetera, in the U.S. banking system, as a result and following the 1929 crash. What FDR and his Treasury Secretary did when they came in, and this is where you see like the nationalization or the confiscation, some people would say, of gold. What they actually did is they reliquefied the banking system with a dollar bailout, if they will. They injected dollar liquidity to get the credit system out of its insolvency state, and they acquired all of the gold reserves on behalf of that. So it was literally a dollars for hard gold swap, if you will. And then they also went, a step beyond and made it illegal for private citizens or the private sector to own gold itself inside the U.S.
Right.
So in that case, you would make the claim or make the statement, and this would probably hold true in the United States. The gold is the property of the people. It's a U.S. Treasury asset. U.S. Treasury custodies it in the military facilities, right? It's held with the military. It's in Fort Knox and it's in West Point. What the banking system has is your paper claims on those gold. They're gold certificates, if you will, and those are they sit there, at the Fed's, basically holdings accounts, if you will, for the U.S. Treasury. I don't think they're included as part of the TGA. It's like a sub account, these gold claims. And they're not marked up. They're not marked to market. They're just sitting there to reflect that, hey, the Treasury owns this gold. Here's the price it's marked at. It's somewhere, mid 30s. It's like $37 an ounce. Nowhere
I
close
was
to
gonna say, I
the
remember you saying it's
4,000 to
extremely,
4,500.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So in the US case, the people own the gold, and that's a result of what happened in the 1930s, right? What you're looking at in the Italian scenario and the entire situation of basically the monetary union is a complete mess, right? And that's my term, not a technical term. Um, but what you're looking at, so the Italian banks had their own gold reserves, and Italy's actually reportedly, just based on the numbers that are printed, this may not line up with actual reality of how much actual precious metal is in each country's or each central bank's vaults. Um, but Italy is reportedly the number three highest on the league tables of gold holdings for sovereign entities. How was that gold acquired? Well, it's the reserves of their banking system over time, right? And this is from the legacy gold standard model. The banks built up and domestic economies built up gold reserves through their surplus, right? That's really where the U.S. kind of, if it does reportedly own the gold it holds, we it's well known that the U.S. has been um, deficit trade balance country for 50, 60, 70 years, basically the entire post-World War II era. Same thing with its fiscal accounts, right? The public debt. So you got the dual deficit situation. There's no real way to build up gold reserves when you're running twin deficits or a current account deficit.
Yeah.
What you would build up your gold reserves from is in your banking system if you're building up a surplus and acquiring gold in vault, which are then kind of fractionally reserved up for the credit claims or as credit issuance, as monetary creation on top of the gold sitting in your vaults, right? So that's how banking worked, on a pegged exchange rate standard. We've gotten rid of that where we have, post 1971, we have free floating fiat currency or sovereign currency units in terms of their market pricing against gold. But in the case of the ECB, which is really like a 1990s development, you had a new startup where you try to begin this monetary union. And basically what the ECB, the way it worked is you would have each one of these European nation states give up their existing sovereign currency. So the Italian lira, the German mark, the French franc, what have you, every country. They basically post an ante, if you will, like a contribution to the European Central Bank. There's a fixed exchange rate then between the old currency that would be retired, so in this case, the Italian lira. And when they make that switch, to get your euros, right, which are, reserve denominated at the ultimate buyer of last resort or lender of last resort at the ECB, to get into that club, you had to post your ante. And the way it was structured, 15% of that had to be in gold. So we'll go through the gold reserves charts. ECB has about 500 tons of gold reserves. And that's in comparison to Italy's, which if we go to the next chart, this would be 8. Cameron, the top 17 gold holders. You've still got Italy holding about 2,500 tons of gold reserves, right? You can compare it to Germany as well as number 2 on the list, France number 4. So the actual national central banks, the banks hold their gold in reserves. It's not the situation in the U.S., is my understanding, where it's actually the public sector treasuries who acquired those reserves. It's the banking system itself, right? So to make that claim, these are the assets of the people. You've also got not a clean mapping. It's not one-to-one. You have a sovereign banking system, the Italian central bank, the Bank of Italy, right? Which is your central bank, your lender of last resorts for the Italian banks. But it's not a clean one-to-one mapping where your public sector owns the gold, which would be in our case the U.S. Treasury, or I think it's the Italian Ministry of Finance. It's like the MEF, I think is the acronym. But it's their equivalent of the public treasury. It's actually the public-private layer, the banking system itself, that owns the gold and that hold the claims on those reserves. And then, and in the case of the Fed, right, you would kind of consider it a public entity, right? Especially after the 1935 FOMC actions, where FDR in the U.S. put in this Washington, D.C. branch, which now operates out of the Eccles building. You have the Fed Board of Governors. Washington, D.C. gets to choose 7 out of 12 of the annual voting members who decide monetary policy. So it's it's a quasi-public institution at this point. That's how the U.S. structure works. Italy, it may be the case. I'm not fully aware of the history and the law. I think each one of these countries requires its own deep dive case study because they're not all the same thing. It's not all apples to apples. Everything's created equal. Um, but in this case, my understanding, it is not the Ministry of Finance's technical gold claims, which Meloni is saying these are the assets of the people. What I would view this as, you know, Giorgia Meloni represents what I would call not quite the full-on populist extreme wing that the kind of European technocrats are really trying to push back against. Like you see this trend, AFD in German elections. It's very clear that the European Commission, the ECB, and then the domestic policy factions like the Social Democrats in Germany, they do not want to see the nationalist wings just win seats in elections or win any popular control. Giorgia Meloni in Italy is kind of the furthest that an individual country or nation state within this European Commission framework has gotten in terms of leaning towards the more nationalist governing faction taking control since the European Union really got underway in the 80s, 90s, and has developed into what it is today. So what I view this fight over, if you just dive in between the weeds, what it actually is representing is a challenge over who has operational authority of these gold reserves. In the European structure, you've got all of these national central banks. So you've got the Bundesbank, France has its central bank, Bank of Italy, et cetera. And each one of those are participating members. And then they kind of roll up or report to the ECB. That's how they posted their reserves. Remember, I talked about 15% of gold goes into that ante to get in that game to be able to tap the European Union's architecture as trying to create this consolidated currency, the euro, to deprecate all of these other nation state specific currencies. But the way the policy is structured, you get into like articles 30, 31 of their treaties. What's at stake here and what's actually being argued over is technically the operational authority over these gold reserves. And what does that actually mean? It structurally means the way that these treaties or agreements were written when Italy enters into the ECB, and this would apply to all the other nation states that have participated in the euro as well. What they actually give up is the operational authority over their gold reserves. So what does this mean? It's questions over basically monetary policy implementation as it relates to gold. So sales, say you wanted to sell some gold to, raise equity capital inside your banking system, what have you. Leasing, so lending your gold or use of that gold to other central banks or possibly outside of the euro, possibly inside of the European Monetary Union. Gold needs to make its way to London at this time, as kind of everybody is aware of. We won't touch that subject right now. Derivatives activity and reserve conversion operations. Under the existing framework, those activities are basically subordinated to the conditional approval set at the Euro system level. What do we mean by Euro system? It's Brussels, Frankfurt, where the technocrats live, which tend to reside in Northern Europe. So that's really what Meloni is arguing over here. It's not, retaking custody of gold. Cameron, do I have control here? Go to slide 6, where the gold actually sits. There's no gold being reclaimed, or that's not actually the issue here. Is Giorgia Meloni saying, "Hey, European Union, you have our gold. We want to take possession back." That's not the situation. So if a lot of the audience might be familiar with the 1971 Nixon defaulting on the gold convertibility window of the Bretton Woods system, right? Where France or Charles de Gaulle could ask for physical delivery of its gold, post dollars, get gold back. That's when Nixon said, nope, this is over. Um, that's not the case here. The golden vault for Italy's reserves actually sits, it's basically, call it 50-50. Half of it is in the Bank of Italy's vault in Rome. So they already have physical, custody of their gold reserves. Like they have the metal within Italy's sovereign borders. The other roughly half, if you will, is at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And this is for this, you put your gold in New York for interacting with the dollar system,
Right.
right? Settling trade there. So that's why it's 50-50. Have some parked domestically to, basically have your domestic banking systems reserves pointing to. And then you have your other reserves in New York. That's for settling international trade. And then you've got tiny slivers at the Bank of England in London, and then the Swiss National Bank in Bern. This is the reported breakouts. Now, these may not be exact. This might not be actually be where the gold is. But for the most part, I would find it credible. It's roughly a 50-50 split. The gold's already, possession's 9/10 of the law, right? As everybody kind of knows the saying. It's already in Rome. It's already in New York. Notice that's not in Brussels, that's not in Frankfurt. So there's no gold that they're calling and saying, "Hey, give us our gold. We're taking physical delivery." This is purely it's an operational authority challenge to the broader kind of technocratic project that is putting together this European Union. And why would this be the case now? Well, if you go back to the charts, you see like which countries hold the gold: Germany, Italy, France. Those are your three largest economies in the EU. ECB, collectively, if you add up those three reserves that each one of their central or each of the national central banks holds, it doesn't even hold a candle, right? ECB's gold reserves are tiny in comparison. So then if you look at the marking to market, right, with gold prices rallying in 2024, 2025, basically what this is saying, in my opinion, so you're looking at a banking system, right? The more gold reserves it has, the higher quality its IOUs would be perceived, or more credible those IOUs, or the credit stack, basically that's levered on top of it, that is fractional reserve banking. What you're actually seeing now with the gold rally is basically a shift in perception. The power is tilting away from that centralized authority, the technocratic project in the EU, and more towards those own sovereign nation states. And this plays into the broader theme. You're seeing this in Germany as well. You've got a big pension bill coming up for election or up for vote tomorrow. That's highly controversial. We're talking about a split, or the Merz governing faction losing its control. What this is basically playing out is basically tilting the balance of power in on the European peninsula, effectively, I think, away from the big group building project that is the EU, that's been underway for 40, 50 years in the making, and back towards the sovereign nation states that are largely driven by national identity and ethnicity. So this is a continue to watch. This isn't something that's going to resolve itself in a couple of weeks or headlines. I think this is part of a big picture story, but it is a key development with Giorgia Meloni in terms of a signpost on this trend that can run for potentially the decade ahead, or possibly beyond. So yeah, this is a big development this week.
Yeah, thanks for contextualizing that for me because I'm sure, like many in our audience, I saw that headline and I thought, okay, it seems important, but don't quite fully understand how this fits into the broader picture. So that's super helpful. And I also think, there's a lot of research we could probably do. Obviously, like you called out with Germany, but looking down this list here, you've got France, you've got Switzerland, you've got India, Japan, right? I mean, a lot of names that pop out here of top gold holders. Seems like there's shifts in maybe how they're interacting with the rest of the world related to that. So definitely something to
Yep,
keep an
it's
eye
a
on.
tug of war. The rope in this case, to make a crude analogy, the rope is the national central bank, and in my kind of framework or understanding of the context, on one side of the rope you've got um, the nation state itself, Italy, and that's Maloney saying like, "Hey, this is the people's," and on the other side of the rope you've got the consolidation, technocrats, the European Union. Uh, project builders, if you will. And that's the tug of war going on. I won't do that hand motion again because it wasn't flattering. I can see the video of myself, but that's what's going on here. It's a tug of war.
Got it. All right. Well,
We'll see.
let's.
We'll see how this plays out. But the gold marking to market, the golden rule, not the one you'll find in the New Testament, but the one you'll hear the banker or the merchant say, "He who has the gold makes the rules." I would default to that here in an era where market price is clearly showing you again that the gold is important. It's going to play an important role in banking and which systems are credible and solvent. So I would lean towards that golden rule. If you had to pick a winner here, it's he who has the gold makes the rules. So I'd bet on the nation states. Italy is clearly at the front line. Let's continue to watch how things develop in Germany and France, but there's big issues there going on. We've talked about the French one, just the cyclical rotations of prime ministers, these legacy wings. The Macron government is basically just hanging on, trying to figure this out, how to keep kicking the can. And you've got the kind of the nation state populist wing with Marine Le Pen and her party, which is they're basically just trying to change the rules as they go to keep the national populist movements from gaining power, which will just completely just halt all progress on this unification project. Same things are starting to take place in Germany. You've got an economy that's really just limping along. The German economy is really struggling. Um, it's really weakly coming out of its recession in 2022, 2023. Then you've got the same issues as France with the pension funding. And you've got a natural kind of intergenerational divide developing between the young workers and then the old pensioners. Something's got to give, but like I said, we'll watch this closely. But this was a key development this week with kind of Maloney and Italy being on the cutting edge of this process that's taking shape.